Senator Johnson, further questions?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let's, again, I'm a private sector guy, so I believe in it. Can you just describe to me the difference between the freight rail system and the commuter rail system? And tell me where I'm wrong, because I think you know a little bit more about the freight rail system, but what percentage of the freight rail infrastructure, the track, is owned by the freight companies?
100%, and their plan is to invest about $24 billion a year in their infrastructure. About 17% of that is CapEx, and the rest of it is maintenance cost. They maintain their railroad at a Class 4 track, which is a lot lower speed, and we also operate much lower speed, about 79 miles an hour on those tracks, and they've done a good job with that.
Okay, but the freight rail system is pretty profitable, correct?
It is now, yes.
Mr. Geddes, you seem wanting to hop in.
Thank you, Senator. I had to raise my hand there, I'm sorry. But if you take a look at the most recent report from the American Society of Civil Engineers, 2013, it came out about a month ago. They rate all sectors of infrastructure in the United States. The sector that had the largest improvement, so it comes out every 4 years, the sector that had the largest improvement in its grade was the freight rail system. And they attribute that to the billions of dollars of, so it went from a C plus to a B plus or something, I can't recall the exact grades, but they attribute that to the massive additional private sector investment in the infrastructure of the freight rail system to bring it up to a much better standard.
Would you say that one of the reasons is because of the discipline of a private sector marketplace, the competition, and the fact that not only do you have to break even, you actually have to build a surplus, and so you have a certain market discipline or pricing discipline?
Yes, Senator, I would attribute it to market discipline on a number of margins. You've got the discipline of the capital markets. As we know, Warren Buffett bought BNSF Rail. There's a lot of capital market discipline there. There's discipline on the margin of product market competition. There's market discipline in a whole bond markets. Discipline these companies through the bond rating agencies. There's a whole series of market disciplines that are brought in, and I believe we can capture that on the Northeast Corridor through the judicious use of public-private partnerships.
Well, I'm just listening to the ridership and the use of those tracks. It looks like it's really at capacity. To me, from the private sector, when you're operating that close capacity, you ought to be expanding or at least charging for the utilization so you can actually make a profit. I mean, is it true, because the numbers are still a little confusing, is it true then the Northeast Corridor, without government subsidy, makes a profit or not?
Are you asking me?
Or whoever might know.
I believe that economically speaking, so your Econ 101, the Northeast Corridor is an enormously profitable asset.
Again,
now,
I'm not talking about the infrastructure surrounding it. I'm talking about just the rail system itself.
I am too.
Does it operate at a profit?
I don't believe under the current arrangements, probably not. But with the proper policies and institutional arrangements, I believe that the Northeast Corridor could be a very profitable asset.
Why not just with proper pricing? I mean, when
Yes,
you're at that level of capacity, shouldn't you be able to increase prices to be able to make a profit on the use of the asset?
Yes, Senator, I agree entirely, and I believe that another underappreciated benefit of private involvement is the incentive and the skills to properly price use of the asset.
So
pricing, as you know, is a big
Let me ask the
management.
other folks, why can't you, when you're operating that high capacity, why can't you at least break even with your own operations without government subsidies? I mean, what prevents that from happening?
If I can attempt an answer here, I think the first key difference between the Class 1 freight railroads, which have performed very well, and the Northeast Corridor is the Northeast Corridor is a mixed-use railroad. So you've got one organization, Amtrak, that owns most of it, not all of it, but most of it, and runs intercity rail service. But it also supports a huge number of commuter rail services, and it supports some freight services. So the key to getting into this and saying, oh, well, it's full, can't we charge more, which is really, pretty basic and common sense question,
there you go.
if you forgive me, is, well, where's the pricing for the use of the infrastructure? And the fundamental first step has to be to charge for the use of the infrastructure on a cost-reflective basis.
So
Because
wouldn't that be the policy prescription? The first policy prescription is make sure that rather than have the taxpayer subsidize that, we come up with a model where the people utilizing the track are actually paying for it.
Well, yes, but, and here's the but, and I do mean yes before I get to the but, and the but is, in particular, when you look at the biggest usage in the corridor, it's actually commuter rail. Commuter rail, the world over, needs subsidy. You will not find commuter railroads around the world, and I don't really see why the U.S. on
But
this
isn't that totally dependent on capacity utilization, though?
Well, it's just,
I mean, and this sounds like very, and I've been on the New York, Washington DC. That's that's a very full train almost every time.
absolutely, but it is also a very peaky business. It's a lot of equipment that's used a couple of times in the day, absolutely flat out. In the middle of the day, it's not used so much, and people try and make better use of it in the off-peak and weekends and so on. The reality is you could increase the charges. The commuters won't love you for it, but you could do.
Taxpayers would like it, though.
Well, yeah, and no doubt those adjustments have been made. I think Mr. Rediker is saying the prices have been going up. I don't have the detail on that. But to think that you will get to a stage where those commuter rail operations, paying properly for their access to the track, are going to be profitable in the way that rail freight is profitable in the U.S., I think the evidence is you're unlikely to reach that position.
But again, you're using your kind of global perspective in general, commuter lines versus a specific corridor that to me is operating at a very high level capacity.
It is.
And again, as a business guy, I'm going, boy, that's something that ought to be profitable. So
Yeah.
that's my only point. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.